How long have you been with us, Melody? 29 years, is it? David Langston leaned back in his leather chair, his voice eerily casual. That's quite the accomplishment. 29 years and 362 days, to be exact, I replied, my stomach nodding as I noticed the manila folder on his desk. In all my years at Grantwell Manufacturing, I'd never been called into a director's office on a Friday afternoon. Something was wrong. I'm Melody Reynolds, 61 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I was the senior compliance officer at one of St. Paul's largest manufacturing companies. I've spent nearly 3 decades ensuring that Grantwell operated within legal parameters, documenting irregularities, and standing firm when others wanted easy solutions to complex problems. My pension was set to fully vest on Monday, just 3 days away. The milestone I'd worked my entire adult life for was within reach. David slid the folder across his polished desk. Due to budget constraints, we're letting you go. His eyes never met mine. Effective immediately. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Budget constraints? Grantwell had just announced record profits last quarter. This is your severance package, he continued, tapping the folder with his manicured finger. Sign by tomorrow or get nothing. HR will escort you to clean out your desk. I should have felt anger, shock, perhaps even the urge to plead. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. This wasn't random. This was calculated, precisely timed to fall before my pension vested. Thank you for the opportunity, I said quietly, picking up the folder. I didn't open it. David looked surprised by my composure, perhaps expecting tears or protests. But I'd spent my career examining patterns, and this one was clear as day. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and walked out with my dignity intact. Janet from HR hovered awkwardly as I packed my personal items, the photo of my late husband Thomas, the potted plant my daughter had given me when she left for college 15 years ago, and the plaque I'd received for 25 years of service. I didn't take much. Most of what mattered couldn't fit in a cardboard box. I'm so sorry, Melody, Janet whispered, glancing nervously toward the security guard waiting to escort me out. This isn't right. It is what it is, I replied, but inside I knew better. This wasn't just wrong, it was potentially illegal. For the past 4 years, I'd been meticulously documenting financial irregularities that had accelerated since David joined the company. I'd sent detailed memos up the chain, flagged suspicious patterns, and even presented evidence of backdated reports. All of it had been dismissed, buried, or returned with instructions to focus on more pressing matters. As I walked through the lobby one last time, the security guard awkwardly held the door. Have a good weekend, Mrs. Reynolds, he said, clearly uncomfortable with his role in this charade. I nodded politely. I believe I will. The drive home felt surreal. 29 years of dedication ended with a manila folder and a cardboard box. The April rain tapped against my windshield as I navigated the familiar streets of St. Paul, Minnesota, past the cathedral where Thomas and I had married, beyond the school where our daughter had graduated, toward the modest home I'd maintained on my own since becoming a widow 12 years ago. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made for Grantwell, the missed recitals during those early years when I worked late to earn my promotions, the family vacations cut short when compliance emergencies arose, the countless evenings spent reviewing documentation that nobody else had the patience to examine. I'd given the company my prime years, believing in the security that my pension would eventually provide. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat quietly for a moment, allowing myself to feel the weight of what had happened. David Langston had been with the company just 6 months. He'd arrived with a reputation for streamlining operations, which typically meant cutting costs at any price. I'd known we would eventually clash when I refused to certify compliance on his latest cost-cutting initiative, a measure that skirted several regulatory requirements. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly and ruthlessly he would move to eliminate me. Inside, I made myself tea and sat at my kitchen table, finally opening the severance package. The terms were insulting: 3 months' salary in exchange for waiving all rights to future claims against the company. No pension, no healthcare continuation, no acknowledgement of nearly 3 decades of service. Just a check and a legal trap designed to silence me. The document required my signature by 5 p.m. tomorrow. They were counting on fear and desperation to make me sign quickly, without consulting anyone. This wasn't standard practice. It was a targeted effort to rob me of what I'd earned. I set the papers aside and walked to my home office, where I kept my personal records. Behind a row of family photo albums sat a fireproof lockbox, my insurance policy. For 4 years, I'd been bringing home copies of troubling financial documents, keeping detailed notes of conversations, and saving emails that outlined patterns of misconduct. Not because I planned to use them, but because my professional instincts told me something wasn't right. I opened the box and reviewed its contents: loan applications with falsified data, quarterly reports with manipulated figures, emails instructing staff to backdate quality control certifications. It was all there, over 1,000 pages of evidence showing systematic fraud that had accelerated under David's direction. I'd reported every issue through proper channels, only to be ignored or sidelined. I reached for my phone, scrolling to a contact I hadn't called in years. Gregory Santos had been Grantwell's chief financial officer before leaving to work for the Securities and Exchange Commission. He'd always respected my diligence, even when others found it tedious. It's time, I thought, as my finger hovered over his name. The next morning, I woke with purpose. After speaking with Gregory for nearly 2 hours the previous evening, I had a clear path forward. I dressed carefully in the navy suit I reserved for important meetings, as if preparing for battle. In a way, I was. Gregory had listened intently as I outlined the situation and described the documentation I'd collected. His response was measured but resolute. This isn't just wrongful termination, Melody. Based on what you're describing, Grantwell could be facing serious securities violations. The timing with your pension, that's just the tip of the iceberg. He'd explained the whistleblower protections available through the SEC and arranged for me to meet with his team on Monday morning. Don't sign anything, he'd cautioned, and secure those documents somewhere safe. I spent Saturday morning making copies of everything, organizing the evidence chronologically, and preparing a detailed index. The work kept my mind focused, preventing the anger and hurt from overwhelming me. By noon, I had 3 identical packages ready, one for the SEC, one for my personal records, and one that would serve as leverage if needed. My phone rang several times throughout the day. Janet from HR, David Langston, even the company's general counsel. I let each call go to voicemail, listening to their increasingly urgent messages. Melody, we need that paperwork signed today. David's voice was tense. I can come by and pick it up if that helps. The legal counsel was more direct. Ms. Reynolds, it's imperative we receive your signed agreement before close of business. Failure to comply could jeopardize your severance package entirely. Their desperation confirmed what I already suspected. They knew they were vulnerable and wanted my silence secured before the weekend ended. At 4:30 p.m., my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see David standing on my porch, his expensive suit looking out of place in my modest neighborhood. I didn't answer. Melody, I know you're in there, he called through the door. This is ridiculous. Just sign the papers and we can all move on. I watched silently as he eventually placed an envelope in my mailbox and returned to his luxury sedan. Only then did I retrieve it, another copy of the same agreement, with a handwritten note. Final opportunity. Sign by 9 a.m. Monday. That evening, my daughter called for our weekly chat. Elizabeth was concerned by the strange tone in my voice. Mom, what's going on? You sound different. I considered downplaying the situation but decided against it. Elizabeth deserved the truth. I was terminated yesterday, I said simply. What? But you're just days away from your full pension. They can't do that. They did, I replied. But don't worry, I'm handling it. Do you need me to come home? I can be on a flight from Denver tomorrow. No, sweetheart, stay put. I've got this covered. After we hung up, I sat in my living room as darkness fell, thinking about Monday's meeting with the SEC. For years, I'd tried to address these issues internally, believing in the system and the company's integrity. I'd been loyal, discreet, and professional, even when I suspected serious wrongdoing. But Grantwell had made its choice, and now I would make mine. I would not be signing their agreement. I would not be silenced. And most importantly, I would not let them discard 3 decades of my life without consequence. Monday couldn't come soon enough. Monday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I dressed carefully, placed my documentation in a secure briefcase, and drove downtown to the federal building where Gregory had arranged our meeting. The weight of what I was about to do sat heavily on my shoulders, but there was also a sense of rightness to it all. The SEC offices were understated but imposing, all glass partitions and hushed conversations. Gregory met me in the lobby, his familiar face lined with more years but still carrying the sharp intelligence I remembered. "Melody," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "It's good to see you, Gregory," I replied. "Thank you for taking this seriously." He led me to a conference room where 2 other investigators waited: Angela Brennan, a senior enforcement attorney, and James Weston, a forensic accountant. Both greeted me with professional courtesy. "Mrs. Reynolds," Angela began, "before we start, I want to confirm that you understand the process we're initiating today. Once you share this information with us, an investigation becomes official. There's no turning back." I nodded. "I understand completely." For the next 3 hours, I walked them through my documentation. The irregular financial reporting I'd first noticed 4 years ago, when shipments didn't match invoices. The quality control certifications that had been backdated after products had already been shipped. The pattern of revenue manipulation that had intensified in recent quarters, particularly after David Langston's arrival. James examined the financial documents with growing concern. "These discrepancies aren't small," he noted. "The company has been systematically overstating revenues by at least 18% for the past 2 years. That's securities fraud." "And you reported these issues internally?" Angela asked. "Multiple times," I confirmed, showing them copies of my memos and emails. Each time I was told the issues were being addressed or that I was misinterpreting the data. When David joined 6 months ago, my concerns started being rerouted to his office where they disappeared entirely. Gregory leaned forward. "And you believe your termination was directly related to these reports?" "Without question. The timing, 3 days before my pension vested, makes it obvious. But more than that, I had recently flagged several major issues with David's latest cost-cutting initiative. He needed me gone before I could escalate further." As our meeting concluded, Angela outlined the next steps. "We'll need your formal statement, then we'll begin our investigation, which typically remains confidential until we determine whether enforcement action is warranted." "How long will that take?" I asked. "It varies," she replied, "but given the documentation you've provided and the clear pattern of misconduct, we may move quickly on this one." I hadn't even returned home when my phone rang. It was Janet from HR, her voice trembling. "Melody, something's happening. The board just called an emergency meeting. David's been locked in his office all morning, and there are rumors about SEC investigators contacting our general counsel." So it had begun, faster than I'd anticipated. The SEC must have made immediate contact with Grantwell's legal team. "I'm not surprised," I said calmly. "Did you—" Janet hesitated. "Melody, did you report something?" "I simply did what I should have done years ago," I replied. "What's happening with my pension paperwork?" "That's why I'm calling. The executive committee is reviewing your termination. They've put everything on hold until further notice." An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, it was William Hargrove, the chairman of the board, a man who had barely acknowledged my existence during our few previous interactions. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, his typically confident voice sounding strained. "We seem to have a situation that requires your input. Would you be willing to come to the office tomorrow morning to discuss matters? I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Hargrove, I replied. Any discussions should include my attorney and potentially representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm sure you understand. The silence on the other end was profound. Finally, he cleared his throat. I see. Perhaps we can arrange something more formal, then. As I hung up, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep weariness at the necessity of it all. I had never wanted to be a whistleblower. I had only wanted to do my job with integrity and retire with the security I'd earned. But Grantwell had forced my hand, and now we would all face the consequences. My phone continued to ring throughout the evening, colleagues seeking information, executives attempting damage control. I answered none of them. The time for private conversations had passed. Now everything would happen in the light. By Wednesday morning, the storm had fully broken. Local business publications ran headlines about an SEC investigation into Grantwell Manufacturing, sending the company's stock into a tailspin. Financial analysts who had praised David's efficiency measures just weeks ago now questioned the integrity of the company's entire reporting structure. I received a formal letter from Grantwell's legal department, withdrawing my termination notice and placing me on administrative leave with full benefits pending an internal review. It was a transparent attempt to mitigate damages coming far too late. At 10 a.m., my attorney Barbara Reynolds, no relation, but the coincidence amused us both, accompanied me to a meeting at Grantwell's headquarters. The same security guard who had escorted me out on Friday now nodded respectfully as we entered. The atmosphere in the building was tense, with employees huddled in whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when we passed. We were shown to the main boardroom, where William Hargrove waited with the company's outside counsel and 3 other board members. David Langston was conspicuously absent. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Reynolds," William began, seeming to have aged years in just a few days. "We've initiated a comprehensive internal investigation into the concerns you've raised." Barbara spoke before I could respond. "Let's be clear about something, Mr. Hargrove. Ms. Reynolds didn't suddenly raise these concerns after her termination. She documented and reported them repeatedly over a period of 4 years, as her job required her to do. The company's decision to ignore those reports, and then to terminate her days before her pension vested, speaks volumes." William shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, well, that's part of what we're investigating. I want to personally assure Ms. Reynolds that her termination has been rescinded. We consider her an employee in good standing with all benefits intact." "Including my pension?" I asked directly. "Of course," he replied quickly. "In fact, we're prepared to offer you a consulting role after your retirement, which you can begin immediately if you wish. We value your expertise and—" "My client isn't making any decisions today," Barbara interrupted, "and any discussion about future arrangements should be preceded by a full accounting of how her previous concerns were suppressed." The meeting continued for another hour, with the board members attempting to distance themselves from both David's actions and the financial irregularities I'd documented. They painted themselves as victims of misinformation, expressing shock and disappointment at the apparent misconduct. I remained mostly silent, letting Barbara handle the legal maneuvering while I observed their body language. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, yet they'd never noticed me. Not really. Now they couldn't look away, their expressions a mix of fear and newfound respect. As we prepared to leave, William made one final appeal. "Melody, we're hoping you might consider speaking with the SEC investigators about the corrective actions we're taking. Your support would be invaluable." I looked at him directly for the first time. "Mr. Hargrove, I've spent 29 years dedicated to this company's compliance. During that time, I filed 47 major reports documenting serious irregularities. I sent 16 memos specifically addressing the issues now under investigation. I requested 9 meetings with executive leadership to discuss these concerns, of which only 2 were granted, and neither resulted in action. At what point in that history did I have your support?" The room fell silent. I'll cooperate fully with both the internal investigation and the SEC, I continued. But I'll be speaking only to the facts, as I always have. Whether those facts support or damage Grantwell will depend entirely on what you do next, not what you say in this room. As Barbara and I walked out, she whispered, "That was perfectly stated." It wasn't until we reached the parking lot that I allowed myself a deep breath. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation began to fade, leaving me drained but clear-headed. This wasn't victory, not yet. It was merely the beginning of accountability. "What happens now?" I asked Barbara as we stood beside our cars. "Now?" She smiled slightly. "Now they scramble to save what they can while the investigation continues. But make no mistake, Melody, they're terrified of you." I shook my head. "They're not terrified of me, they're terrified of the truth. There's a difference." Barbara nodded thoughtfully. "There is indeed. And that difference is why you'll win this, regardless of how it plays out." As I drove home, I wondered what Thomas would have thought of all this. My late husband had always encouraged my meticulous nature, even when others found it frustrating. "Your attention to detail isn't a quirk, Melody," he'd say. "It's a superpower." Perhaps he'd been right all along. By Friday, exactly 1 week after my termination, the story had evolved into a full-blown corporate scandal. The SEC had issued formal requests for information from Grantwell, and an internal memo from William Hargrove announced David Langston's immediate suspension pending investigation. The company's stock had dropped nearly 30%, triggering concerns from major investors and partners. I was no longer just Melody Reynolds, overlooked compliance officer. Business journals now referred to me as a whistleblower and the woman who exposed Grantwell. The sudden attention was uncomfortable, but I remained focused on the process, working closely with the SEC investigators who now had offices set up in a separate building near Grantwell's headquarters. The evidence I'd provided had opened many doors, but the investigation was revealing even more troubling patterns. Gregory called to update me on their progress. "Melody, it's worse than we thought," he said, his voice grave. "The financial manipulation goes back at least 5 years, predating Langston. He accelerated it, but he didn't start it." "I suspected as much," I replied. "There were irregularities I couldn't fully document because I couldn't access certain executive-level reports." "Well, we can access them now," Gregory continued. "And they tell a story of systematic fraud designed to inflate the company's value. The board is claiming ignorance, but at least 3 members had to have known. They signed off on key transactions. This news should have vindicated me, but instead, it left me feeling hollow. The company I'd dedicated my life to had been corrupted at levels even I hadn't fully comprehended. The people I'd trusted with my concerns had been actively participating in the very fraud I was reporting. That afternoon, I received a call from Elizabeth. Her voice was tight with anger. "Mom, have you seen the news? They're trying to discredit you." I hadn't. I'd been avoiding media coverage, focusing instead on the official proceedings. "What are they saying?" I asked calmly. "That Grantwell executive, Langston, gave an interview claiming you had performance issues and were bitter about being passed over for promotion. He's making it sound like you're retaliating because of personal grievances." I wasn't surprised. It was a predictable defense strategy: attack the whistleblower's credibility rather than address the allegations. "It doesn't matter, Elizabeth," I assured her. "The evidence speaks for itself. My performance reviews have been exemplary for 29 years. They can't rewrite that history now." But David was trying to do exactly that. By that evening, several news outlets had picked up his narrative, questioning my motives and suggesting I had manipulated documentation to frame him. It was a desperate move from a desperate man, but it still stung to see my integrity questioned so publicly. Barbara called immediately. "Don't respond to any of it," she advised. "The SEC will issue a statement tomorrow clarifying your whistleblower status and the credibility of your evidence. Let the official channels handle this." I wasn't planning to respond, I told her, but I am going to do something else. The next morning, I drove to my local bank and asked to speak with the manager, Tracy Ferguson. I'd known her for years as she handled most of Grantwell's local banking transactions. "Melody," she greeted me warmly. "I've been following the news. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Tracy, but I need access to my safe deposit box." Inside the private room, I opened the box and removed a sealed envelope I'd placed there 3 years ago. It contained copies of email exchanges between David's predecessor and 2 board members, discussing ways to manage financial appearances during a critical acquisition period. I had found these accidentally while archiving old emails, and something had told me to secure them separately from my other documentation. I hadn't included these in my initial SEC report because they weren't directly related to the current issues. But now, with David attempting to undermine my credibility, they provided crucial context showing that the problematic practices predated my concerns about him specifically. I called Gregory immediately. "I have something you need to see," I told him. "It changes the narrative completely." As I drove to meet him, I felt no satisfaction, only certainty that the full truth would now emerge, regardless of who it implicated. The emergency board meeting was called for Monday morning, 10 days after my termination and 7 days after the SEC investigation became public. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be there to know what was happening. The additional documentation I'd provided had accelerated the investigation dramatically, implicating not just David, but multiple board members in a years-long pattern of financial manipulation. Gregory called me from outside the meeting room. "It's chaos in there," he reported. "The SEC enforcement team just presented their preliminary findings. 3 board members have resigned on the spot. David is trying to claim he was following established practices, but no one's buying it anymore." By noon, Grantwell issued a press release announcing a leadership restructuring and full cooperation with regulatory authorities. The carefully worded statement confirmed the resignation of 4 board members, including William Hargrove, and the termination of David Langston for cause. The company's stock, already battered, dropped another 12%. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Janet from HR again. "Melody, the interim CEO wants to meet with you. Tomorrow, if possible." The interim CEO was Patricia Donovan, the former chief operating officer who had always treated me with professional respect, if not warmth. I agreed to the meeting but insisted it take place at my attorney's office. When Patricia arrived the next day, she looked exhausted but determined. "Melody, I won't waste time with pleasantries," she began. "The company is in crisis, and you're at the center of it. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you were the only one who consistently did what was right." She slid a folder across the table, eerily similar to the termination paperwork David had presented just 11 days earlier. "This officially rescinds your termination, reinstates your employment retroactively, and confirms your full pension vesting," she explained. "It also includes an additional compensation package recognizing the difficulties you've experienced." I opened the folder. The compensation package included a sum equal to 5 years of my salary, full healthcare coverage for life, and a formal apology from the board. "We're also establishing a new corporate ethics division," Patricia continued. "We'd like you to help design it, as a consultant, after your retirement. Your experience is invaluable." I closed the folder without commenting on the offer. "And David Langston? The board members involved?" Patricia's expression hardened. "Criminal charges are expected. The company will not be defending them." Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived at Grantwell Manufacturing. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom, watching as David Langston and 2 former board members entered guilty pleas to securities fraud charges. The man who had so casually ended my career now looked diminished in his dark suit, his arrogance replaced by defeat. Our eyes met briefly as he turned to leave, and I saw recognition there, not of me specifically, but of what I represented, the consequences of his actions personified. The Grantwell scandal had become a case study in corporate governance failures and the crucial role of internal compliance. I had declined the consulting position with the reorganized company, choosing instead to work with regulatory agencies to develop better whistleblower protocols. My story had inspired other compliance officers to come forward with their own documentation of corporate wrongdoing, creating a ripple effect across industries. The SEC had awarded me a substantial whistleblower payment, 15% of the penalties assessed against Grantwell. Combined with my pension and the settlement, I had more financial security than I'd ever imagined possible. I'd established a scholarship fund for women pursuing careers in corporate ethics and compliance, naming it after Thomas. Elizabeth had relocated to St. Paul to be closer to me, bringing my 2 grandchildren with her. We spent weekends together at my new lakeside home, building memories I'd missed while working all those long hours. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset over the water, Elizabeth asked a question that caught me off guard. "Mom, do you regret staying at Grantwell all those years, given how it ended?" I considered this carefully. "No," I finally answered. "I regret that it was necessary to expose them, but I don't regret my work there. Integrity isn't just about being honest when it's easy. It's about maintaining your principles even when, especially when, it costs you something." Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. "You taught me that, you know. Not with words, but by example." That, I realized, was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all. Not the vindication, not the financial security, but the knowledge that my choices had shown my daughter what it meant to stand firm in your values, regardless of the consequences. As for Grantwell Manufacturing, the company had survived, though greatly diminished. The new leadership had implemented stringent compliance protocols and transparent reporting practices. They still sent me their annual reports, perhaps as a reminder, perhaps as an apology. I read them carefully, noting the improved practices with professional satisfaction. Some might see my story as one of revenge, but I've never viewed it that way. I simply did what I had always done, documented the facts, reported the truth, and stood by my findings. The difference is that this time, finally, others were forced to listen. "We thought your brother needed some fresh air. He's going with us instead of you. I'm sure you don't mind," my mom said with that dismissive chuckle I knew too well, as my brother John dragged his suitcase across the San Francisco airport terminal, arriving from Denver. I stood frozen, the welcome sign I'd made dropping slightly in my hands. This luxury cruise, the one I'd spent months planning and saving for, was supposed to be my chance to finally bond with my parents. Instead, here I was, watching my unemployed brother steal my place without so much as a thank you. My name is Marianne Thompson, and at 35, I've built a successful life for myself in San Francisco, far from my family's constant disappointments. I'd saved for nearly a year to afford this 5-day cruise, working extra projects and giving up vacations of my own. The presidential suite, the premium dining package, the exclusive shore excursions. I'd carefully chosen every detail to make it perfect. Perfect for the 3 of us, me, my mom, and my dad. Not for my 37-year-old brother who still lives in their basement playing video games all day while they pay his bills. When I let them fill out the online forms for the trip I had paid, I never expected them to put my brother's name instead of mine. "John gets seasick if he sits in the back," my mom announced, already ushering him toward the passenger seat of my rental car. My dad stood quietly behind them, avoiding my eyes like he always did when they pulled stunts like this. I watched as John sprawled out in what should have been my seat, immediately pulling out his phone to check his gaming notifications. The cruise documents in my bag suddenly felt heavy, all those carefully planned dinner reservations and excursions I'd booked, now useless. "The cruise line needs advance notice for passenger changes," I said quietly, knowing it wouldn't matter. My mom waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, we already took care of that weeks ago. We just transferred your spot to John's name. The resort confirmed everything yesterday." The casual way she said it, like replacing me was the most natural thing in the world, made my stomach twist. I gripped my car keys tighter, feeling the metal bite into my palm as I forced myself to smile. Some part of me knew, standing there in that crowded airport terminal, that this moment would change everything. The happy families rushing past us, the excited chatter of vacation goers, it all felt like a cruel mockery of what this trip was supposed to be. As I loaded their luggage into the trunk, I could hear my mom already telling John about the spa treatments I'd booked for what was supposed to be our mother-daughter day at sea. The drive to the port felt like watching a movie of my life on repeat. Every mile marker brought back another memory of being pushed aside for John. Growing up in Denver, our roles were clearly defined. John was the one who needed support, while I was the one who could handle things on my own. When I got a full scholarship to college in San Francisco, my parents barely acknowledged it because they were too busy consoling John about his latest failed job interview. When I landed my first executive position, my mom's only response was to ask if I could send more money to help with John's gaming equipment. I'd tried everything to win their approval. Every achievement, every milestone was another attempt to prove I was worth their attention. My apartment in San Francisco's Pacific Heights, the one I'd worked 60-hour weeks to afford, sat empty more weekends than not because I was always flying back to Denver, trying to be there for family dinners that inevitably turned into celebrations of John's latest non-accomplishment. "Your brother's thinking about maybe taking some online classes," my mom would gush, while my recent promotion went unmentioned. My dad would just sit there, nodding along, occasionally throwing me apologetic glances that meant nothing without action behind them. This cruise was supposed to be different. I'd spent months planning every detail, imagining how proud they'd be when they saw the luxury suite I'd booked, how impressed they'd be with the exclusive restaurants I'd reserved. I kept picturing my mom's face when she saw the private balcony with its own hot tub, my dad's reaction to the premium wine package I'd arranged. For once, I thought, they'd see me, really see me, and understand how much I'd accomplished, how far I'd come. Instead, here I was, listening to John complain about the car's air conditioning while my mom reminded me to drive carefully because your brother gets car sick. The leather steering wheel felt slick under my sweaty palms as we approached the cruise ship area. Through the rearview mirror, I could see my mom showing John photos of the suite on her phone, the suite I'd spent countless extra hours at work to afford. "Look at this infinity pool," she exclaimed. "It's exactly what you need to relax, sweetie." I tightened my grip on the wheel, wondering if they'd even notice the tears I was blinking back. The worst part wasn't even losing my place on the cruise. It was realizing that they'd probably planned this switch weeks ago, never once considering how it would make me feel. The cruise terminal loomed ahead, its massive white structure gleaming in the California sun. My mom was practically bouncing with excitement as I unloaded their luggage, while John hadn't even bothered to help, too busy texting his gaming friends about his upcoming vacation. I watched as one of the porters wheeled away their bags, my carefully packed overnight bag still sitting untouched in the trunk. The bag I'd filled with new sundresses and sandals, planning for dinners I'd never attend, memories I'd never make. "You'll take lots of pictures, right?" I heard myself asking, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. My mom was already digging through her purse for their boarding passes, the ones I'd originally booked in my name. "Oh, of course, we'll show you everything when we get back," she replied, not even looking up. My dad at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he stood there. "Thanks for the ride, honey," he mumbled, before my mom called him over to handle the check-in process. I stood rooted to the spot, watching as they made their way through security. John turned back once, not to thank me, but to ask if I'd remembered to pack his motion sickness pills in his carry-on. The same pills I'd packed for myself, now transferred to his bag without my knowledge. Through the terminal windows, I could see the massive cruise ship, its pristine white hull stretching toward the sky. The ship I'd spent months researching, reading every review, studying deck plans late into the night to pick the perfect suite location. As they disappeared into the terminal, I felt something inside me shift. Years of swallowed hurt, of pushed-down anger, of trying to be the good daughter who never complained. It all crystallized into a single clear thought. I was done. Done trying to prove my worth to people who would never see it. Done competing with a brother who didn't even have to try. Done being the afterthought in my own family. Getting back into my rental car, I made a decision that would change everything. If my family wanted to act like I didn't exist, I would finally give them what they wanted. Complete silence. No calls, no texts, no emails. Let them have their cruise. It would be the last thing they ever got from me. As I pulled away from the terminal, I could see them in my rearview mirror, already laughing and chatting as they headed toward their vacation. My vacation. But for the first time in my life, their happiness didn't make me feel small. Instead, it made me feel powerful. Because I knew something they didn't. This was the last time they would ever take me for granted. The first call from my mom came just hours after they set sail. "The suite is gorgeous, honey. John just loves the private balcony. You should see how relaxed he looks already." Her voicemail was full of details about how much my brother was enjoying the amenities I'd paid for. I deleted it without responding. The second call came during their first dinner at the upscale steakhouse I'd reserved months in advance. "The Wagyu beef is amazing. Your brother says it's the best meal he's ever had." Delete. By day 3 of their cruise, my mom's messages had taken on a slightly confused tone. "Marianne, why aren't you answering? We sent you some photos of the spa day. The massage therapist said it was just what John needed for his gaming-related back pain." My dad left one awkward voicemail, mostly filled with uncomfortable pauses, and a half-hearted, "Hope you're doing well." John predictably didn't bother to call at all. I imagined him sprawled on the balcony lounger I'd picked out, probably complaining about the ocean being too loud while he played games on his phone. I threw myself into work that week, staying late at the office, taking on extra projects, anything to keep my mind off what was happening on that ship. But every ping of my phone, every new voicemail notification, sent a fresh wave of anger through me. The photos they kept sending were the worst. My brother posing in front of the infinity pool I'd dreamed of swimming in. My parents beaming at the candlelit dinner I'd planned as a special moment with them. Each image was like a knife twisting in my gut, but it also strengthened my resolve. "Sweetie, we're back home now," my mom's latest voicemail chirped. "John had such a wonderful time. It was exactly what he needed. We have so many stories to tell you. Call us back." I stared at my phone, remembering all the times I'd rushed to return their calls, desperate for their approval. Not this time. This time, their calls would go unanswered, their messages unread. As I blocked their numbers one by one, I felt a strange mix of grief and liberation. The daughter they took for granted, the one who always answered, always showed up, always tried to please them, she was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who finally understood her own worth. 2 weeks after their return, the desperate attempts to reach me intensified. My parents began calling my office, prompting my assistant to politely inform them that I was unavailable. They tried emailing, texting from different numbers, even reaching out through my cousins on social media. Each attempt met the same wall of silence. My mom's messages grew increasingly frantic. "Marianne, this isn't like you. We're worried. What's wrong? Why are you being so difficult about this?" I focused on rebuilding my routine without them in it. No more rushed weekend flights to Denver, no more long phone calls listening to John's latest gaming achievements, no more forcing myself to smile through family dinners where I felt invisible. I redecorated my apartment, replacing family photos with art I loved. I joined a hiking group, started taking cooking classes, filled my newly free weekends with things that made me happy. The constant weight of trying to earn their love began to lift, leaving me feeling lighter than I had in years. "Your brother is very upset," my mom's latest email read. "He says you're being selfish, that you've ruined the nice family vacation we had." I laughed out loud at that one, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed through my empty kitchen. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. They'd stolen my vacation, replaced me without a second thought, and somehow I was the selfish one? Something about that email solidified everything for me. It was classic them, twisting the situation to make John the victim, making me the bad guy for finally standing up for myself. My dad tried a different approach, leaving a voicemail that actually acknowledged something was wrong. "Honey, if this is about the cruise, well, maybe we should have handled it differently." The subtle understatement was so typical of him, always seeing the problem, but never quite brave enough to really address it. Too little, too late. I added his new number to my blocked list, feeling a small pang but pushing through it. Each time I refused to engage, each call I didn't return, each message I deleted, it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd given away years ago. 3 months into my silence, my mom's facade finally cracked. Her latest voicemail was different, raw, emotional, without the usual excuses for John. "Marianne," her voice cracked. "I understand now. The cruise. We took it from you. You worked so hard to give us something special, and we didn't even think about how it would hurt you. We've always taken you for granted because you were the strong one, the successful one. We thought you didn't need us like John does. I see now how wrong we were." My dad followed with his own message, his voice heavy with regret. "Sweet pea, I've been a coward. All these years I've watched your mother and brother dismiss your achievements, and I never stood up for you. I just let it happen because it was easier than rocking the boat. You deserved better from me. You deserved better from all of us." For the first time, I heard real pain in his voice, not just discomfort. The most telling response came from John. Complete silence. No apologies, no acknowledgement of what he'd done. In his mind, he probably still saw himself as the victim, but his silence spoke volumes, highlighting exactly why I'd needed to step away. While my parents were finally facing their mistakes, he remained unchanged, entitled, expecting the world to revolve around him. I sat in my home office, looking out over the San Francisco skyline as I listened to their messages. The sun was setting, painting the bay in shades of gold and pink, and I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. Their belated recognition of their behavior didn't fix the years of hurt, didn't erase the pain of being replaced on that cruise, but it validated my decision to stand up for myself. Their desperation to reach me proved what I'd suspected all along. They'd only valued me when they couldn't take me for granted anymore. Later that evening, as I deleted their latest messages, I caught my reflection in the window. Shoulders back, head high, a quiet confidence in my expression that hadn't been there before. The daughter who would have done anything for their approval was gone. In her place stood a woman who finally understood that their approval had never been worth the price they demanded. 6 months into my silence, my life had transformed in ways I never expected. Without the constant drain of trying to please my family, I found energy I didn't know I had. I redecorated my apartment, replacing the beige walls my mom had insisted on with bold colors I loved. The formal living room furniture that had sat unused, bought because my mom said it made me look established, was donated and replaced with comfortable pieces that actually fit my style. Each change felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. My weekends, once devoted to exhausting flights to Denver and endless family obligations, became mine again. I joined a women's hiking group, started taking photography classes, and even began learning to sail on the bay, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. The money I'd once spent on plane tickets and gifts for John now went into my own adventures. I started a travel fund, planning trips for myself instead of expensive presents for others who didn't appreciate them. Work changed too. Without the constant interruptions from my mom's dramatic calls about John's latest crisis, I found myself more focused, more creative. I got another promotion, this time allowing myself to really celebrate it instead of downplaying it to avoid making my brother feel bad. My colleagues noticed the change in me, commented on my newfound confidence, the way I spoke up more in meetings, how I seemed more present and engaged. The hardest part wasn't the silence itself. It was handling the waves of guilt that sometimes crashed over me late at night. Years of conditioning had taught me that I was responsible for my family's happiness, that setting boundaries made me selfish. But as the months passed, those waves of guilt grew weaker. I started seeing a therapist who helped me understand that my family's behavior wasn't just thoughtless. It was emotional abuse. She helped me see that my silence wasn't punishment. It was protection. Their messages continued, evolving from angry demands to desperate pleas. My mom's latest email was particularly revealing. "We never realized how much we depended on you until you were gone. John's struggling without your help, and we don't know what to do." It was telling that even in her apology, she was still focusing on John's needs. But for the first time, I felt no urge to rush in and fix things. Their struggles weren't my responsibility anymore. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset over the bay, I found my dad's last voicemail still saved on my phone. "I miss you, sweet pea." His voice wavered. "I miss the daughter I never took the time to really know." I let myself cry then, not from guilt or pain, but from recognition of my own growth. The daughter he missed no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, someone who understood that love shouldn't require erasing yourself. Exactly 1 year after the cruise incident, my parents showed up unannounced at my office in San Francisco. My assistant, who had become fiercely protective of my boundaries, called to warn me. "Your parents are in the lobby," she said. "Should I have security escort them out?" I sat at my desk, staring at the family photo I'd finally removed from my wall last month, and made a decision I'd been preparing for all year. "Send them up," I said, my voice steady. When they walked into my office, they looked smaller somehow. My mom's usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by something almost timid. My dad's shoulders were hunched, his eyes unable to meet mine at first. The silence stretched between us until my mom finally spoke, her voice breaking. "We sold the house," she said. "We told John he has to move out and support himself. We're trying to fix things, not just with you, but with everything." I gestured for them to sit, noting how they perched uncertainly on the edge of their chairs, so different from their usual entitled comfort. My dad pulled out a thick envelope. "These are from the cruise," he said, placing it on my desk. "Every receipt, every charge. We've calculated exactly what you spent, including the deposits and excursions. We want to pay you back." I looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "It was never about the money," I said quietly. "It was about respect, about being seen, about having my feelings considered just once before John's." My mom started crying then. Real tears, not the manipulative ones I'd seen her use so often. "We know," she whispered. "We know that now. But we didn't just come to repay the cruise. We came to tell you that we're in therapy. Both of us. Learning why we did what we did. Why we put so much on you and expected so little from John." I listened as they talked about their realizations, about the damage they'd done, about their hopes to rebuild, not the relationship we had before, but something new, something healthier. They didn't ask for immediate forgiveness or demand I resume contact. Instead, they gave me something I'd never received from them before: respect for my boundaries. As they stood to leave, my dad handed me a letter. "Take your time," he said. "Read it when you're ready. We'll wait until you decide if and when you want us in your life again." They walked out of my office without trying to hug me or make me promise anything. I sat there long after they'd gone, holding the unopened letter, feeling the weight of all it represented. For the first time in our relationship, they were putting my needs first. It wasn't earth-shattering or dramatic, just a quiet acknowledgement of my worth, my right to set boundaries, my power to choose the relationship I wanted. It's been 2 years since that day in my office. I did eventually read their letter, a 12-page confession of every time they'd pushed me aside for John, every moment they'd taken me for granted, every opportunity they'd missed to be real parents to me. It wasn't just an apology. It was an acknowledgement of who I'd become despite their treatment. They wrote about watching me from afar this past year, seeing my success, my strength, my refusal to shrink myself anymore. John never did apologize. Last I heard, he was finally working at a local gaming store, forced to support himself for the first time at 39. My parents maintain careful boundaries with him now, no longer rushing to solve his every problem. They're learning, slowly but surely, that enabling him was never love. It was fear. Fear of letting him fail. Fear of letting him grow up. Fear of losing their role as his perpetual saviors. As for me, I'm different now. The woman who stood in that airport terminal, silently accepting her replacement, feels like a stranger. I've learned that true strength isn't about enduring mistreatment. It's about having the courage to say, enough. My worth isn't measured by my family's approval anymore, and that's the most valuable lesson this whole experience taught me. I've started rebuilding a relationship with my parents on my own terms. We meet once every few months, just quiet conversations where they listen more than they talk. My mom no longer launches into stories about John the moment we sit down. My dad has found his voice, sharing his own thoughts instead of just nodding along with whatever my mom says. It's not perfect, but it's real, and that's all I ever wanted. Last week, my dad called just to tell me he was proud of the woman I've become, not because of my success or achievements, but because I finally stood up for myself. "You taught us how to be better parents," he said, by showing us what we stood to lose. My mom added that watching me build my life this past year helped her understand what she'd been doing wrong all along. "We kept trying to make you smaller," she admitted, "when we should have been helping you shine. Sometimes I think back to that cruise they took without me. What felt like the ultimate betrayal became the catalyst for my transformation. By replacing me on that ship, they actually set me free. Free to become someone who would never again accept being an afterthought in her own life."